Welcome back everyone to Srila Prabhupada, our founder Acharya, lesson 2, the founder Acharya. So in the first lesson we looked at the Guru principle, what a spiritual master is, why we need a spiritual master, how the spiritual master is one, how spiritual masters are different, and how all spiritual masters are different manifestations of the original spiritual master, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Okay, so every time I have a slide as the title slide, lesson 2, the founder Acharya, there's a reason I have the image there. And the reason is, for this one, okay, so this is, I'm just going to, I won't ask so many questions and tell so many stories, but this is a longer lesson. And if we're going to stop at 9 with questions, then I better just go through it and not ask you so many questions. Okay, so there according to Google Images is Srila Vyasadeva, and there is Madhvacharya. So I have this image up there because Madhvacharya is not the Diksha disciple of Srila Vyasadeva. He's the Shiksha disciple. If you look at our list in the book, the Guru Parampara, it's Krishna, Brahma, Narada, Vyas, and then there's quite a leap, all the way to Madhva. That's like a 4,000-year leap. If you go to Udupi, the seat of the Madhva Sampradaya, you will find out that Madhvacharya was initiated by such and such Maharaj. But in the list we have, it says Vyastamadhva, which is just one of the many examples of how our parampara is a shiksha parampara. It's not a line of initiators and initiated. It's a line of instructors and instructed. There's overlap, of course. Srila Prabhupada's own Guru Maharaj happened to be the founder Acharya of Gaudiya Math. So he was both instructor and initiator. But by and large, when we see our list, it's a list of highlight Shiksha Gurus. So very early on in ISKCON's history, especially in the 1960s, the way people found things out from Srila Prabhupada was very often by letters, because there were hardly any books. There was just a very, very, very abridged edition of the Bhagavad Gita, and there was teachings of Lord Chaitanya. So there was a lot of letters being written. And so we're going to look at a couple of letters from 1969, which reminds us that we are in a Shiksha Parampara. It's called the Bhagavat Parampara, or the Shiksha Parampara. So, let's see here. Here's a letter to a godbrother Dinesh. He was asking, what is the disciplic succession? What is that all about? And so Prabhupada writes, quote, disciplic succession means to accept the disciplic conclusion. And that's just a one-liner. Okay? It's all about being in a line of teachers where the Siddhanta is the same. And then in 1969 also, Kirtanananda Maharaj wrote Prabhupada a letter, and he asked, and one of the many things he asked was, why is Arjuna not in our list? I mean, Arjuna is our hero. He's our hero, he's the exemplar of getting it right, hearing from Krishna. Param Brahma, Parayo, oh, you're God. I get it. So Kirtanananda Maharaj very rightly asked, well, why isn't Arjuna in our disciplic succession? So here's how Prabhupada answered. Quote, disciplic succession does not mean one has to be directly a disciple of a particular person. Arjuna accepted Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and we, Prabhupada saying we Gaudiyas, we also accept the same truth under the disciplic succession of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And then Prabhupada quotes an axiom from math. Things equal to the same thing are equal to one another. Another example, Prabhupada says, is that a tree has many branches, and you will find one leaf here and another leaf there. But if you take this leaf and the other leaf and you press them both, you will see that the taste is the same. The taste is the conclusion. And from the taste, you can understand that both leaves are from the same tree. So Krishna is the root of all existence. It's not possible to list all the branches and the sub-branches and it's unlimited practically. But we can know if we're in the same disciplic succession by the Siddhanta, the taste of Siddhanta. So, just wanted to get that straight right there. So now what we're going to do, and don't forget, write it down. You didn't bring your pen, or you did, you brought a pen. Good. Or make a mental note. If you have questions, please say them for the end. I'm just going to go right through this. There's a lot of slides for this lesson. Here we go. So there is Srila Prabhupada's Guru Maharaj asking us, what is the origin of founder Acharya? Remember that, because when that phrase first finally appeared in the 20th century, an English Sanskrit compound hybrid phrase, it appeared in his time. Okay, well now we're going to go back in history to trace the origin from the perspective of our Gaudiya line, or in the Brahma Gaudiya. That's Lord Chaitanya's time. Sampradaya. Okay, there we go. So we're going to look at different seeds of that concept of founder Acharya. All right, there they are. We sing to them all the time, the Shad Goswamis, the 6 Goswamis. So Lord Chaitanya, he lived from 1486 to 1534 according to the Christian calendar, just 48 years. Within a dozen years of Mahaprabhu's disappearance, somewhere in the 1540s, there sprung up an organized Sangha. Because Lord Chaitanya himself, as we hear, did not write much down. He only wrote down Shikshastra. But he left it to his chief disciples, the 6 Goswamis, to articulate the philosophy of Achintya Vedha Veda Tattva, the inconceivable and simultaneous oneness and difference of God and his creation. Okay. So, now please read that.
In the 16th century, after the disappearance of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, his chief disciples, the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan, founded the Vishva Vaishnava Raja Sabha.
Now we're going to find out what that means. Read that.
The Vishva Vaishnava Raja Sabha is the gathering of devotees who worship the king of the world's Vaishnavas, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu.
Right. It's the Sabha. Oh, that's good. Yeah. So it's the gathering, the Sabha, the gathering of devotees that worship the Vishva Vaishnava Raj, the king of the world's devotees. That's Lord Chaitanya. So that's an organizational seed of founder Acharya, because that phrase, founder Acharya, has an organizational component. Founder, someone who founds something, establishes something. And Acharya, and one who is the greatest example of what he founds. So Vishva Vaishnava Raj Sabha, and there are the 6 Goswamis, I'm not sure who's who, but the one who emerged as the biggest organizer of the 6 Goswamis was Srila Jiva Goswami. He organized the first book distribution party, if you know about that. Srinivasa Acharya, Shyamananda Prabhu, Narottam Das Thakur, and he organized the Radha Damodar temple in Vrindavan, and he was the biggest mover in organizing this Sangha, just like we have Bhakti Vriksha and Namahat and all these things, and ISKCON is a global Sangha. So they organized this Sangha to study, worship, distribute the teachings of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Jiva Goswami emerged as the biggest organizer. Sanatan was the elder statesman. And as we're going to see now, Rupa Goswami emerged as, he was called the chief because he was the Rasa Acharya. We're going to look at that in a minute. So there's Rupa Goswami writing and weeping and weeping and writing Udiya, Kandiya. And now we're moving in from a organizational seed, Rupa Goswami, in 1552, when he finished writing Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, as Prabhupada says at the end of the book. Rupa finished in 1552 by the Christian calendar. And right in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, there are seeds. There's how do I call it? A philosophical seed of founder Acharya. Let's see, Prabhu, what's your name?
Radha Paddas.
Radha
Paddas.
Radha Pad. Okay, Prabhu. Radha Pad, can you read that?
In his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Srila Rupa Goswami identified the fourth principle of devotional service as Sadhu Vartamanu Vartanam, which Srila Prabhupada later translated in the Nectar of Devotion as following in the footsteps of great Acharyas, teachers, under the direction of the spiritual master.
Sadhu Vartmanu Vartanam. So the way Prabhupada unpacked that in English, centuries later, is very interesting because you don't necessarily get from Sadhu Vartmanu Vartanam how Prabhupada translated it. Following the footsteps of great Acharyas, that's what you get. But then he says, teachers, under the direction of the spiritual master. There's a clear distinction there between great Acharyas and one's personal spiritual master, and Prabhupada says this also in the introduction to Nectar of Devotion. Quote, in our mental activities we should always try to think of Krishna and try to plan how to please him, following in the footsteps of the great Acharyas and the personal spiritual master. Remember in lesson 1 how we learned how Guru is one, but Gurus differ. They differ by the role they play, Shiksha Diksha. They differ by the qualifications they have. They're on different levels of advancement. And they differ by their commitment to us. Some just introduce us, some initiate us, some instruct us. It's really all about instruction, remember we said that. So first we have an organizational seed, the Vishnu Vaishnava Raj Sabha, something organized. And then we now have a philosophical seed of Founder Acharya. We're getting a distinction between gurus, regular gurus, and great acharyas. And now we fast forward just 8 years to Narottam Das Thakur, circa 1560, most scholars say, that Srila Narottam Das Thakur finished a very famous song collection, some of whose songs we sing every day here in the temple. We just sang one, Sri Guru Vandana. This is from a song collection called Prarthana, famous song collection. We also sing in Mayapur, what is it? Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu. And then when someone leaves our company, it's very bittersweet, and we sing Yeya Nilo Premadana. And my favorite bhajan is Gauranga Balite Ode. This is all from the Prarthana collection. There's 60-some songs in there. Now, in the 17th song of Prarthana, Narottam Das Thakur, he wrote the song to Srila Rupa Goswami. And Rupa Goswami is not, they don't call him Founder Acharya because English is still locked in the British Isles. This is around the time of Shakespeare. Shakespeare, 1564 to 1616. So it's Elizabethan English. But they don't, instead of calling Rupa Goswami their Founder Acharya, they say Rasa Acharya. And so here's what Prabhupada says, quote, Srila Rupa Goswami is described as the Bhakti Rasa Acharya, or one who knows the essence of devotional service. His famous book, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, is the science of devotional service, and by reading this book, one can understand the meaning of devotional service. So Rupa Goswami is contemporary to Narottam Das Thakur, and who was Narottam Das Thakur's Diksha Guru, initiating spiritual master? Does anybody know? Lokanath. And Narottam, if you know the history, was the only Diksha disciple of Lokanath, because Lokanath didn't want to accept disciples. But as we've heard from Srila Prabhupada, Narottam endeared himself so much to Lokanath. He begged Lokanath to accept him, and Lokanath refused. And then he started doing the menial service of cleaning up after Lokanath after he did his morning duties, morning business. And then Lokanath noticed that. Who's doing this? Who's cleaning up after me in the morning? Then he spied and he saw Narottam. Narottam, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? You must accept me as your disciple. And still he refused. And then Lokanath Maharaj had a dream. And Lord Chaitanya ordered him to accept Lokanath, or Narottam, as his disciple. So it's like an only child. Can you imagine how close they were? Lokanath Goswami and Narottam Das Thakur. Very close. And yet in the fourth song, or 17th song of his song collection, Prarthana, we have this. Prabhuji, I forgot your name already. From Karib. Guadalupe. What's your name again? Your name again? Gaurasundara. Can you read that?
In his Prarthana collection, Srila Narottam Das Thakur, in 4th verse of Psalm 17, and Psalm of Srila Prabhu, rules and prayer.
Prabhu Lokanath Kone, Sangeloya Jabe, Shrilupera Padapane, More Samartipe. Goswami Prabhu, please read the translation of that 4th verse of this song.
When will my master Lokanath Goswami take me with him and place me at the lotus feet of Srila Prabhu?
Narottam is saying, when will my Diksha Guru, my master, and I'm his only disciple, Diksha disciple, take me with him and place me at the feet of Srila Rupa Goswami? Now what do you think? Do you think Lokanath feels like he's been jumped over, or slighted, or minimized, or offended in any way? How does he feel? He feels honored. He knows it's his duty as Narottam's Diksha Guru, his initiating spiritual master, to enrich, deepen, enhance his disciples' relationship with their, they don't say founder Acharya yet, they call him Rasacharya. That's the job, that's the role, that's the business of the gurus, is to enhance their foundational relationship with their group leader. Or they said Rasacharya, we say founder Acharya. That's a kind of cultural seed now. It's a kind of relationship seed of founder Acharya. So far we have organizational, there was a Vishwa Vaishnava Raj Sabha, then we had philosophical. Rupa made a distinction between great acharyas and one's personal spiritual master. And now we have a relationship seed here from Narottam Das Thakur. Very interesting. To get the next seed, we've got to fast forward in time about 300 years. Because by Mahaprabhu's inscrutable, mysterious will, which will become a little more understandable in the next lesson, the very renaissance that he started, the very bhakti renaissance that he ignited in medieval India, medieval Bengal, was eclipsed. He allowed it to be completely eclipsed, overshadowed, submerged by so many upasampradayas, by so many fake Vaishnava groups, pseudo-Vaishnava sects, for about 300 years. It wasn't until our hero, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, came along in the 1800s that all these, fake bhakti groups were exposed. Who's that? Okay, turn all your electronic devices off, please. Were exposed. So we're going to talk about why Mahaprabhu let that happen in the next lesson. But single-handedly, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he revived pure bhakti, which had been completely overshadowed, by these owls, bowels, saki bekis, goranga nagaris, siddha-pranais, prakriti sahaja, for so many hundreds of years. And then the Thakur not only revived he convinced the Bhadralok, the Bengali aristocracy, to take a fresh look at Mahaprabhu's teachings and not be so, misled by the British that it's all, inferior. Take a look at your own culture. It's superior. Nothing compares to Inchivchiveda Vedatapa. He not only did that, but then he reached out to the West. He revived the pure teachings in the East, and then he reached out to the West. He was the original bridge preacher in the movement. Prabhupada calls Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur the pioneer of the Krishna consciousness movement in the Western world. He envisioned everything from the GBC. You know where he got that? GBC? Governing Body Committee. And he got it from Indian Railways. They had a GBC. Thakur was great at dovetailing. You know the tune we sing for Jai Radha Madhava? If you go to Mayapur, the locals will tell you, oh yeah, that's an old Bengali wedding tune. Da 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 da. But the Thakur appropriated it to glorify the divine couple. You know that poem we hear, alas for those who spend their days in festive mirth and joy, the dazzling deadly liquid forms their hearts forever employ. 23 stanza poem, tracing the fall and the redemption of the jiva. He got that from Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, that meter, or that whole, structure to the poem. He Krishnaized the whole thing. He was great. He knew how to do it. He knew how to connect east to west. So the Thakur envisioned everything from the GBC all the way down to Namhat, Marketplace of the Holy Name. We mentioned that song. Kodalita. He says he's the sweeper. Down to Bhakti Rickshaw. He envisioned a worldwide movement. Yeah. But he knew he didn't have time to manifest it. So he prayed for his Raya Vishnu. He got it in his fourth son, Bimal Prasad Bhakt. And then his illustrious son manifested a whole institution. Gaudiya mission. Okay, so let's go up there because now, I think I just preempted the top already, I'm sorry. Okay, well no, this is okay. Because before we go to Gaudiya Math, in 1900, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he wrote a book in Bengali, which was in Bengali for decades, but in recent decades we've become aware of it. And it's well known to us in ISKCON because it's called Hari Nama Chintamani, the touchstone of the holy name. But that was written all in Bengali. So we're going to give you a few linguistic seeds. We're going to see how they blossom later in the lesson. Linguistic seeds of Founder Acharya that the Thakur wrote in Harinama Chintamani. Maybe Sandamani Maharaj can read that.
In his Harinam Chintamani, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur sowed the Bengali seeds of the future English Sanskrit phrase Founder Acharya in chapter 6. Disregarding the Guru, verses 23 and
22 and 23. I'm just going to give you the seeds. Can you see? Okay.
No.
Okay, here are the seeds. I'll say the Bengali. Sampradayera Adi Gurura, which means?
The original Guru of the Sampradaya.
Okay, that's one phrase. Here's another phrase from those verses. Adyacharya Yani.
One who is the original Acharya of the Sampradaya or
branch. Sampradaya branch. Now that's important. And then, Guru Shiromani.
the crest jewel of all the Gurus.
Okay, those are the seeds. We're going to take a look at how those seeds blossom later in the lesson in the full translation of those two verses. This is the most telling identity of the founder Acharya, and it was done right by our pioneer, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. But first, before we tell you how they blossom, let's go to the 1920s. Bhaktivinoda Thakur passed on in 1914. his illustrious son in 1918 sat down in front of a picture of his Diksha Guru, Srila Gaura Das Babaji, and received sannyas from the picture. You don't imitate that. If you can chant a billion names in Mayapur for 9 years straight, if you can be a ray of Vishnu, if you can have an eidetic or photographic memory, you might be able to do that, but it's not imitatable. Okay, now what we're going to see, Krishna Kumari Maharaj, can you see that? Let's see if you can, why don't you read that?
The English Sanskrit phrase founder Acharya first appeared in the Gaudiya publication.
Yes, it's in the time of the Gaudiya Math, where their founder Acharya, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, he knew that English was the rising star of languages in the world. He was encouraging all of his educated disciples to learn and become very proficient in spoken and written English. So now we're coming up to the point where we're going to see the advent of this phrase, because both in this publication, The Harmonist, which Srila Bhaktisiddhanta called a free English translation of his father's publication back in the 1880s and 90s, Sri Sajjana Toshini, for the satisfaction of the Vaishnavas, freely translated as The Harmonist. In 1927, the first issue of the English version, the English reincarnation of The Harmonist, appeared. That's volume 1, right there. It appeared to be like an annual there, from June 27 to May 28. That's how it started. That's where it first appeared, and we're going to take a look at when it first appeared in The Harmonist in the next slide. But let me just show you the rest of this slide. This book was published in 1933. Sri Krishna Chaitanya. The history of this book is that in the 1930s, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, he was getting ready to send some Gaudiya Math sannyasis to the West. But he would not send them unless and until they had some ammunition, a book, to impress cultured, intellectual Westerners. He wanted them to go armed with some very articulate and eloquent knowledge in books. So he commissioned, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta commissioned his scholarly disciple, Professor Nishikant Sanyal, who became initiated as Bhakti Sudhakar Narayan Das, to write a trilogy. 2 of the volumes were eventually published, but after the first volume was published, in 33, before it was published actually, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta himself sat down with the manuscript and personally edited it. So it was a collaborative effort, Professor Sanyal, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, and so was The Harmonist. The Harmonist was mainly done by Sanyal and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, with others too involved. Okay, so let's take a look at how that phrase, after all these seeds have been planted since the 1500s, let's see how the phrase advents. Alright, so, Prabhu, name again?
Kirtan.
Kirtan Jam. Okay, Kirtan. Read from here down to here.
October 1913. The Gaudiya Math is also identical with its founder Acharya. The associates, followers, and abode of his divine grace are limbs of himself. None of them claim to be anything but a fully subordinate limb of things.
Prabhupada is said to have said, and he said other things that amount to this, but this comes my body. He did say that you were all the limbs of my body. I mean, we definitely have that recorded. So, there it is. Look at this. The Gaudiya Math is also identical with its founder, Acharya, with 2 Y's. So that's how it first appears. Founder, somebody who found something. Acharya, someone who's the greatest example of what that institution teaches. Okay, and then in Sanyal's book, Sri Krishna Chaitanya, he says even more about it. And what Sanyal does is he makes something very explicit. What Bhaktivinoda Thakur only implied in his Harinama Chintamani, Bhaktivinoda Thakur implied a connection between the Adi Gurus of disciplic successions like Brahma, Shiva, Lakshmi, 4 Kumaras. They're the Adi Gurus of those 4 Vaishnava lines. So the Thakur implied there was a connection between them and the very powerful representatives of them in our Kali Yuga, like Ramanuja, Madhva, Nimbarka, Vishnu Swami. He implied that, but Sanyal made it very explicit, and so did Srila Bhaktisiddhanta by collaborating. So let's see, Aaron, where are you?
The systems of Sri Vishnu Swami, Sri Nimbarka, Sri Ramanuja, and Sri Madhava are connected with the ancient times by the recognition of the remote authority of the eternal ancient teachers, namely Lakshmi, Brahma, Rudra, and the 4 Kumaras respectively.
And there's brackets there because there were names in there that meant the same thing, but they were a little obscure, so I just bracketed them and put more familiar words. Go ahead.
The 4 founder acharyas of the Aryan Age professed to preach the views of those eternal teachers of the religion.
Right. Sanyal called the Adi Gurus of the lines the prehistoric teachers, the teachers of cosmic antiquity before there was, records as we know them. It's funny, we take literacy, when you take Western civilization in school, and literacy is taken as a sign of advancement, right? When reading and writing came in, that's when we became civilized. But actually, it's just the opposite. When reading and writing came in, that means we were too dull to remember. That's when reading and writing came in. Okay, so there's a very close... The 4 founder acharyas, they're representing very powerfully the Adi Gurus of their sampradayas. Here's how it looks visually. We're not all linguistic learners. Sometimes we're more visual learners, so here's how it looks visually. You see there's Rudra, Lord Shiva, powerfully represented in our Kali Yuga by Vishnu Swami, preaching, technically his preaching was called Shuddha Dvaita. We'll talk about these 4 things in a minute. There's Chatusana, the 4 Kumaras, powerfully represented in our Kali Yuga by Nimbarka. You always hear Prabhupada say this: Krishna is accepted as the Supreme Personality of Godhead by Madhvacharya, Ramanujacharya, Vishnu Swami, Nimbarka, and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. There's Lakshmi, Sri Lakshmi Devi, and she's powerfully represented. If you go to Sri Rangam, there's 2 branches, but the most powerful, prominent branch of the Sris is Ramanuja, preaching Vishishta Dvaita. And there's our Adi Guru, Lord Brahma, Sene Brahma Vida, powerfully represented in our Kali Yuga by Madhva. If you go to Udupi, they all identify themselves as Madhvas, and he's preaching Dvaita. You see, he's not flashing the peace sign there, but if you go to, you've been to Udupi? In bas relief, right outside the temple, is this powerful, Madhva, strong incarnation of the wind god, real powerful person. And he's making the point. There's 2. There's Ishvara and Jiva, and don't you forget it. That's why if you go to Udupi, they really like ISKCON, because they know Prabhupada's pranam mantra. Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya. He's out to kick out impersonalism and voidism, and so are they. Madhva's on a real crusade against Mayavad. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, now you might wonder, well, where do we fit in, right? We're the Brahma Madhva, but we're Gaudiya, because in Lord Chaitanya's time, the Gaudiyas wanted to distinguish themselves from the Madhvas, because there's actually many people who call themselves Madhvas who are called Tattvavadis. You've heard of the Tattvavadis. Okay, there's differences with the Tattvavadis, and also there are many people who call themselves Tattvavadis who don't really follow the teachings of Madhva either, they don't practice it. So Lord Chaitanya, both in terms of practice and precept, wanted to distinguish his teachings, so it's the branch took a further turn, Brahma, Madhva, Gaudiya, and so here's how Prabhupada describes the relationship. Prabhupada makes an analogy here. Listen to this. Quote, This is in CC. Before the creation of this cosmic manifestation, the Lord enlightened the heart of Lord Brahma. So that's the Brahma. We're in the Brahma Sampradaya, right? With the details of the creation and manifested the Vedic knowledge. Now, Prabhupada's making the point here that in exactly the same way, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, now remember, he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He's playing the part of the devotee, but he's Krishna. It's the same way that Lord Chaitanya, being anxious to revive the Vrindavan pastimes of Lord Krishna, impregnated the heart of Rupa Goswami with spiritual potency. By this potency, Srila Rupa Goswami could revive the activities of Krishna in Vrindavan. The Goswamis established these Leela stans. You know, when you go in Parikrama, that's because of the Goswamis. They did that. Srila Rupa Goswami could revive the activities of Krishna in Vrindavan, activities almost lost to memory. In this way, Lord Chaitanya spread Krishna consciousness throughout the world. So, if you look at the Gaudiya Mat literature, just as Krishna's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but you have Adi Gurus of these four Vaishnava lines. So in the Gaudiya Mat literature it says, so in the Gaudiya Sampradaya, in the way the Sampradaya terms since Lord Chaitanya's time, Lord Chaitanya, he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead for the Gaudiyas. And the six Goswamis are the Adi Gurus. They're the direct disciples of Lord Chaitanya, articulating Mahaprabhu's philosophy. But then for hundreds of years, it was eclipsed, right, by so many upper sampradayas. But now in the 20th century, it says in the Gaudiya Mat literature, the founder Acharya, powerfully reviving and representing the Goswamis, is Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. Interestingly enough, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta never referred to himself as the founder Acharya of the Gaudiya Mat, as our Prabhupada did of ISKCON. Although he let himself be referred to as the founder Acharya. Let me just make this point. The point of the whole thing about founder Acharya is that founder Acharyas are the foundational gurus for everyone in their reciproc lines. As I've been saying, they provide the core identity and the core relationship. And as we saw with Lokanath Maharaj, the business of gurus is to enrich and enhance their disciples' relationship with their founder acharyas. In their case, Rupa Goswami, Rasacharya. So here's the last known reference to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta as the founder acharya of the Gaudiya Mat. On Christmas Eve, December 24th, 1936, just a week before the Thakur was to pass away. So, Mataji, I don't know your name.
Karen.
Karen, can you read from here, or say from here to here?
Yes. The spiritual head of the
Gaudiya.
Gaudiya mission. The Gaudiya map is the instrument and counterpart of His divine grace,
Paramahamsa Parivrajaka Acharya Sri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj. You got that? That's a mouthful.
It lives and moves and has its being in the founder Acharya.
So it, meaning the Gaudiya mission, the Gaudiya Mat, lives and moves and has its being in the founder Acharya. Guess what that is an echo of? That's an echo of the Bible. Because the Bible is one of the pillars of English language culture, and Bhaktisiddhanta was encouraging his preachers to learn English. So listen to this. This is a perfect echo from the book of Acts, wherein the Apostle Paul refers to humanity as having its being in God. Quote, "In Him we live and move and have our being." So it was likely Professor Sanyal that put that in there, because he's talking about Bhaktisiddhanta, and he was expert in English. So, okay. Okay, that's the last known reference to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta as founder Acharya. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, because the founder Acharyas of the four Vaishnava lines, Ramanuja, Madhva, Vishnu Swami and Nimbarka, they were also referred to as Sampradaya Acharyas. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta did not presume that he was a Sampradaya Acharya. I mean, the Gaudiya Sampradaya is a term in the Brahma-Madhva Sampradaya, so he didn't want to say he was that. And also, I'm just giving you reasons why he didn't personally refer to himself as founder Acharya. But also, he being Trikaladya, being a liberated soul, he could see what was coming, what was going to happen to his own mission, which is lesson 4 that I won't do here, but I will do in Phoenix. And there's a lot of evidence from what he told Prabhupada, the person who became our Prabhupada, that he knew what was going to happen to the Gaudiya Math. So, very interesting. Okay, so now we're going to revisit. See, I've been moving right along here. This is good because we're going to have plenty of time for questions and answers. We're going to revisit now Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Harinama Chintamani verses about the founder Acharya in English translation. Alright? So revisiting Srila Bhaktivinoda's Harinama Chintamani founder Acharya seeds in the full translation. Now remember, this book was written in Bengali. It was published in 1900. We didn't have the translation of this in English until Sarvabhavana Prabhu, who's a Bengali-born person who can also, is very good in English, and until Bana Maharaj, Bana, our Japanese-Canadian who's been residing in Chennai for years, translated the Harinama Chintamani. But I got this translation from these two verses from ISKCON's own Jayapataka Maharaj, who wrote an Avyasa Puja offering to Srila Prabhupada in 1989. If you have the database, you can even go there. You go to 1980, you go to Vyasa Puja homages, 1989, GBC, Jayapataka Maharaj, and you can read all about the position of the founder Acharya from Jayapataka Maharaj translating Bhaktivinoda, because he knows Bengali too, although he's not necessarily a scholar. But this is where it first appears in ISKCON literature. So let me just, I'll tell you something more about the reference. But let's just see how Maharaj translated Bhaktivinoda and how those seeds appear in full translation, and it's really stunning. This is the most powerful evidence for the position of founder Acharya. And we're doing this because we're setting the stage for Prabhupada in the next lesson. Okay, so let's see what's going to happen. How about Navadvip?
Why don't you first of all accept the instructions of the
Sampradaya Adi Gurura.
original guru of the Sampradaya, and he according.
Okay, now that means the original gurus of each line, right? Brahma, Shiva, Lakshmi, who else? 4 Kumaras. Okay. So that's the Adi, and
In the civil succession of Vaishnavas, previous acharyas are established respectfully as Shiksha Gurus for the Sampradaya.
okay. Now, so then we have, we talk about previous acharyas, right? And we revere the previous acharyas. There's so many previous acharyas who are great stalwart, famous Vaishnava scholars and pure devotees. But now the Thakur says this. Go ahead, Navadvip.
However, the
Adyacharya Yani.
founder acharya, original guru of the cyclic line, is appropriately worshipped and respected as the Guru Shirmani, the topmost crown jewel of the spiritual masters. His perfect philosophical conclusions are to be followed by all in his succession. Any contrary instructions will not be accepted.
Yes. So the founder Acharya is a very special kind of guru. When somebody is empowered to the level of a founder Acharya, he is the one through whose eyes we see all teachers and teachings. Okay? He's the lens. It's like Srila Jiva Goswami Prabhupada. I think I brought this up maybe into code. Jiva Goswami says there's one verse, then we have to see all the other 17,999 verses in the Bhagavatam through this one other verse. Does anybody know the verse? This one. First canto. It's in the first canto, third chapter, Descriptions of Incarnations, verse 28. Ete cham sukalak pumsa krishnastu bhagavan swayam indravidyatkulam lokam hridayanti yuge yuge. After all his incarnations are listed, right, these highlight incarnations, then Sutta Goswami says, all of the above mentioned incarnations are either plenary portions or portions of the plenary portions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But Krishna, that incarnation that we already talked about, he's the original Supreme Personality of Godhead. Krishna's tu Bhagavan Swayam. So Jiva says, this is the verse through which we see all the other verses. Similarly, the founder Acharya is so empowered. He's taking the teachings of all the previous acharyas in his line, and he's empowered to distill those teachings and present them all over again in a way that's appropriate for the new time. So it's a very special guru. You don't see him through others' eyes. We see everyone through his eyes. No. Okay. So, let's see what else. Okay, now we're going to look at, I owe a debt to His Holiness Shivaram Swami for also studying Harinama Chintamani in the translations that we had in the 1990s. And his book, Shiksha Guru, he also noticed that Bhaktivinoda Thakur, there's a lot about Founder Acharya in Harinama Chintamani. So Maharaj identified symptoms of a Founder Acharya from Harinama Chintamani, and I'm just using his list, and it's very powerful evidence of the position of the Founder Acharya. So Ananta Prabhu, why don't you read that one?
He possesses great spiritual strength.
Great spiritual strength. Where does he get this strength? From Krishna. We say in English, love can move mountains. Right? What to speak of the highest levels of praying. Okay, great spiritual strength. And, go ahead, Ananta.
His teachings take precedence over all others and are compulsory for his followers.
Now, precedence is a tricky word. It's not that the founder of Acharya pretends to surpass the previous Acharyas, but because he is so empowered, he's able to take, again, those teachings and represent them in a way that's effective and appropriate for the new time. He never claims to surpass the previous acharyas. Just like in Chaitanya Lila, there's that pastime of Vallabha Bhatt, or Vallabhacharya. That a lot of Gujaratis are Vallabhacharya people. So Vallabhacharya went to Lord Chaitanya and said, I have written a commentary of the Bhagavad that surpasses the commentary of Sridhar Swami, the original Bhagavatam commentator. So what did Mahaprabhu say, Oh, you've surpassed your Swami. Swami also means husband, right? Then that's like you become a prostitute. So back in the day, in Prabhupada's time, the devotees published that exchange in Back to Godhead, and it infuriated a lot of Vallabha Vaishnavas, including Sumati Maraji. She wrote Prabhupada, why have they just said this? So Prabhupada wrote the editors of BTG, why did you bring that up? You don't have to mention that in Back to Godhead magazine, this incident. But the fact does remain that somebody who's really a great acharya never claims to surpass. He knows it's only by their mercy he's able to do what he's doing. Okay, Ananta Prabhu.
Holds a unique post.
Unique post. You don't replace him. And that was the big mistake. It's tricky because at one and the same time, Srila Prabhupada, he didn't want us to get an offensive attitude towards God brothers, but he didn't want us to repeat their mistakes. So after Siddhanta Saraswati left, right at the end, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta said, work conjointly. That's the word he used. Prabhupada uses the word cooperatively. Work conjointly. We have no desire than to be the dust of the lotus feet of Rupa Raghunath. Preach together, cooperatively. Have a GBC. He took his father's direction, Bhaktivinoda's direction. Make work cooperatively, collectively. Because Bhaktivinoda Thakur knew that if we're going to start getting this Priti Viti Achayata Nagaradi Gram prediction going here, in every town and village, my holy name will be sung. Lord Chaitanya is recorded in the Chaitanya Bhagavad having said that 500 years ago. It wasn't happening. And the Gaudiya Mata sannyasis thought, what, is this literally possible? Because they went to Europe, they got discouraged. Prabhupada said, that story of his godbrother Bhakti Siddhanta Maharaj being approached by the Marquis of Zetland. I think Prabhupada meant the Shetland. Confirmed or something. Some chairs. The one Marquis of Zetland approached my godbrother. Could you make me a Brahmin? Oh yes, just follow these 4 rules. No intoxication, no illicit sex, no meat eating, no gambling. Impossible! So the Gaudiya Mata Swami thought, wow, these people are, they can't even follow the basic principles of spiritual life. So how is this possible? Every town and village? I mean, maybe it's a metaphor, More about that next lesson tonight. So holds a unique post. They made the mistake after Siddhanta Saraswati left of trying to replace him. The 2 camps were vying for who's going to replace Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. He didn't say to do that. He said just work cooperatively, collectively, under the supervision of a governing body, and they didn't get it. So, anyway, next lesson we'll see how Prabhupada ensured that wouldn't happen in this kind. Ananta.
Is the Acharya or leader of all Vaishnavas present?
No small thing to be a legend in your own time, right? So even there was tension with the godbrothers. Prabhupada's godbrothers had issue with him. Why are you letting him call you Srila Prabhupada? That's only for Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. Why are you letting men and women serve together in the same centers? This is not done. They had issues with Prabhupada. But there was some kind of reconciliation at the end. Because Srila Prabhupada at the end of his life was in the mood of Uttam Adhikari. He was no longer scolding people, he was just appreciating everyone. And he said to Bhakti True Maharaj, call my godbrothers, I have to apologize to them. Because to protect ISKCON, Srila Prabhupada had to speak and write some very heavy things about what happened to his own Guru Maharaj's mission, and he knew it must have offended them. So he said, call the godbrothers. So a lot of them came. And, so this is how it's recorded in the Lilamrita, the exchange. Prabhupada begged forgiveness from them for any offenses he may have committed, and called himself Mahapatita, greatly fallen. They immediately corrected him by saying Prabhupada was Mahapatita Pavana, savior of the greatly fallen. Ashram Maharaj, you are the eternal ruler. You will rule over us, chastise us, guide us. Prabhupada, forgive all my offenses. I became proud with my opulence. Godbrothers, no, you never became proud. When you started preaching, opulence and success followed you. This is the blessing of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Sri Krishna. There cannot be any question of offense. That was in TKG's diary just a month before Prabhupada passed away, October 13th. Okay, so one more symptom.
A word's power of attorney to his followers and strictly adhere to his teaching.
Power of attorney, power of representation. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur said, you can know how great a Vaishnava is by how many others he restores as Vaishnavas. What a touchstone that person can be. Now, as a final evidence of founder Acharya, before we take questions, I visit our sister Sampradaya, the Ramanujis, the Shris. So they're mainly based in Tamil Nadu, and they speak Tamil and Sanskrit, and so they don't say founder Acharya, but they do have words to distinguish, for example, their Ramanuja from all the gurus who come after him. So they call Ramanuja their Uddharaka, Uddharaka, Uddharaka. And that Uddharaka means that Ramanuja is on such a level of power and purity that he's capable of delivering everyone. He's like a Jagat Guru. He's like the savior of the mind. And he writes the Mahagranthas, the great books, for them. And it's his Murti they worship. And I didn't know this, I just found this out in Sri Ranjan. But they preserved that Murti. They preserved his Vapu. You can still visit the Vapu of Ramanujacharya after 1,000 years. And it's his Vishishta Dvaita mission that they prosecute. So he's the Udarak, he's the deliverer, and then they call all the gurus who have come after Ramanuja for now 1,000 years, the Upakaraka. And that means benefactor gurus. How do they benefit people? How do they benefit their disciples? They bring their disciples to the lotus feet of the Udarak, Ramanuja. They study his books, sound familiar? They worship his Murti, sound familiar? And they execute his mission. That's the job of the gurus who come after the founder Acharya. So, let's see. So this morning we looked at, and by the way, that's in a Sri scripture called Sri Prapanamrita Tapanam. So this morning we looked at organizational, philosophical, relationship, or cultural and linguistic seeds of founder Acharya. We looked at how the phrase finally invented in the 20th century, and we looked at symptoms of a founder Acharya. And then tonight, at Gangeya Prabhu's, having looked at the origin and characteristics of the founder Acharya principle, we are now ready to examine how our Srila Prabhupada emerged as the founder Acharya of the ISKCON branch of Lord Chaitanya's tree of divine love. By the way, so what's one more footnote? So, I've been sharing these evidences for founder Acharya, and I was using Jayapataka Maharaj's translation of those Bhaktivinoda verses, which is the crowning touch to the evidence of the position of founder Acharya. And I had them authenticated in Mayapur by a couple of different Sanskritists, but they were kind of low-level Sanskritists, or middle level. And then when I was in Chennai giving a seminar, Bhanu Maharaj was there, and he translated Harinama Chintamani. So with holding my breath, I went into his room one day. I said, Maharaj 23, would you tell me if it's okay? Because I've been using it, because it just fit in so well with my presentation. I've just been using it anyway, with authentication, but kind of, middle level authentication. So there he was, I showed him the slide, and they looked at the verse, and I'm like, and he goes, yeah, it's fine. And I'm like, thank you. So, if it's good enough for Bhanu Maharaj, it's good enough for me. Okay, so 8:47, we got a few minutes. See, if I told a lot of stories, we wouldn't have had time. But these lessons are satisfying to the extent that people are allowed to have time to get doubts and, stuff off their chest. Okay, any questions? Aaron?
So these changes, when the new founder Acharya comes, the purpose of this is for the time, place, and circumstance.
Changes.
It's the same message. So the changes and the tree you're talking about, the new founder Acharya, is because of the way to present it to the people in this.
Yeah, it's like Srila Prabhupada, we'll see that I'm getting ahead of it now. In the course of time, things tend to dissipate. They get splayed out. That's what Krishna says, Sakali Neha Mahata. So, when the Kali Yuga came in, there was need for these four sampradayas to get refreshed, reinvigorated. Needed someone to take the sampradaya in a dynamic new direction, like Madhva. He really ran with it, to get the Maya bodies the Brahma Sampradaya. And all these different, you saw those Sanskrit words below the pictures. They were all different technical Sanskrit terms describing the relationship between Krishna and his energies. Whether it's Shuddha Dvaita, Vishishta Dvaita, Dvaita, but those philosophies, or those four sampradayas, they are perfected when Lord Chaitanya comes. They're not complete. They're true, but they're not complete until you get Achintya Veda Veda Tattva, the inconceivable simultaneous oneness and difference of Krishna and his energies. The others, you get an aspect of that. So, so founder acharyas do that. They reinvigorate the line. Prabhuji.
Can you please put the pictures before that one? The last text when he said, power of authority to his
Attorney. Representation.
To his follower, especially there to his teacher. That is a good one here to transform to the Ritvic. It's not going to be transform not explain Ritvic are very against the Shilapapa disciple. They say it's only Shilapapa. That's a good point for them.
Yeah, well, okay. We don't address Ritvikism completely until lesson 9, which you aren't going to see. We not only address Ritvikism, we address the roots. And I've seen the enemy, and the enemy is us. Ritvikism is a reaction to Dikshism. I'll just plant that seed. Yes?
Thank you very much, sir, for your nice explanation. But today, Prabhupada is accepted as a founder Acharya in ISKCON. But out of ISKCON, there are so many Gaudiya Vaishnavas. Why they do not accept him as founder Acharya?
Well, who's their founder, Acharya? Yeah, but that mission is a mission fragmented. That's why you're going to see in the next lesson. Let's save it for tonight. Yeah, there was a need to revive the Gaudiya mission. If Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's disciples had obeyed him and worked collectively and cooperatively and formed the GBC, they made a half-hearted attempt to form the GBC, because after all, he did say it. But that attempt quickly collapsed under pressure from two camps who were vying to replace Bhaktisiddhanta. You don't replace a founder Acharya. You work collectively and cooperatively to execute his mission. If they had obeyed Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, guess what we'd be? We'd be in the Gaudiya Math. Just like we're having many generations of ISKCON now, right? Okay, but they didn't do it. So there was a need to this is the next lesson. Yeah.
So, there's been fragments within the Gaudiya Math and we have ISKCON. But several of the Gaudiya Math groups now, as we know, we haven't talked about them very much, but they're also, because of ISKCON, they're preaching.
Right.
Some of them very vigorously.
Yeah, it's good.
So is that, I was going to ask you, is that a good thing? Is that a
Yeah.
bad thing?
Here, let me, I think I read. See if it's in this.
They're preaching, but sometimes they just.
The key word is C, the C word, cooperatively, not competitively. That's lesson 8. Let's see if it's in this lesson. And maybe it's in the next lesson. Yeah. Yes. Srila Prabhupada said some very heavy things about why the Gaudiya mission fragmented. And we had a very scary preview of that ourselves in the 1980s in ISKCON. What can happen when the founder Acharya's position is eclipsed? Maybe you weren't in ISKCON then, many of you. But this so-called zonal Acharya era, that was a reprise, a surfacing again of what happened in the Gaudiya Math. But it was nipped, because at least we had a GBC. As maybe as dysfunctional or as immature as it was, at least there was some structure to rally around. That's the only reason ISKCON survived in the 1980s. So, we're not we're not sectarian. It's not that we say, yeah, Prabhupada is the way, the light, the truth, knoweth cometh unto Krishna except by Srila Prabhupada. Put your hands on the TV set and heal. You know, we're not TV Hare Krishna evangelist preachers. We don't say Prabhupada's the only person. But we do say, if you want to follow Prabhupada, this is his life, his teachings, his move and mission. And this is the Sangha. You can go to there's plenty of Gaudiya Swamis around. But that Gaudiya mission effectively dissolved as a mission, if you want to talk about a concerted, cooperative, collective mission, when they fundamentally disobeyed their founder Acharya's instruction to work cooperatively under the supervision of a governing body. They didn't understand. How can a spiritual movement be run by a bunch of managers? Guess what? When those managers are following the instructions of a pure devotee, their management is not material, it's spiritual. So Prabhupada was so determined to see in the next lesson that we not repeat that mistake. Yeah, it's the next lesson. So
most of us are not going to ask. We're talking about the bona fide sampradayas and so forth. Okay, but in the Gaudiya Math, there's gurus. Are they bona fide spiritual masters?
Yeah, if they're following Srila Bhakti Siddhanta, we're talking about a worldwide mission now. As a world mission, that Gaudiya mission fragmented and dissolved. You'll see how Prabhupada tried to revive it in the 1960s. You'll see how when our Prabhupada came, it wasn't his intention, it was not Prabhupada's intention when he came to be the founder Acharya of anything. He didn't come to start a new thing. He came to revive the Gaudiya mission. They didn't cooperate. You'll see it tonight. It's heartbreaking. The same nonsense that happened in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s repeated itself in the 60s. You'll see why tonight. We're getting ahead. Yeah. So again, we're not saying Prabhupada's the only way to Krishna, but if we're saying if you want to be part of a dynamic worldwide preaching movement, follow the one who inherited by dint of his own unprecedented surrender, inherited that Gaura Shakti from Bhakti Siddhanta. He got it because of his surrender. And we have to do it too. Maybe not as powerful as Prabhupada, of course not. But we also, in our own way, to our own capacity, have to surrender to Prabhupada and the disciplic succession and carry on the legacy. But tonight is where the whole Sambandha culminates. And we have a little more time tonight at Gange's house. I'm hoping we have more time and fuller Q&A. It's 8:57, but yeah. So, stay tuned. Can you all come tonight? It's going to be good. It's the lesson I teach when there's only one time. You can't come? Oh, he's recording it. So. And it's online too, right? Okay, any more?
Just one quick question. So before Lord Chaitanya came, the Acharyas, the great Acharyas before that time, were not able to give their disciples Krishna Prema. They weren't able to deliver them at the highest level.
Yeah, if you go to the different sampradayas, there's different moods. There's little differences in terms of rasa and tattva. That's why Kaviraj Goswami, what did he say in the fourth verse of Adi Lila? Anapitacharing Chirahat, may that Supreme Lord, the son of Sachi Devi, be transcendently situated in the innermost chambers of your heart. Resplendent with the radiance of molten gold, he has appeared in the age of Kali to bestow what no incarnation ever offered before. The most sublime and radiant mellow of devotional service, the mellow of conjugal love. He's inviting us to have a very intimate relationship with the Supreme Lord. And interesting, contemporary to Lord Chaitanya in the West were two Christian saints who were also having intimations of conjugal relationship with God. This is Teresa of Avila and Saint John of the Cross. They were and to this day, when nuns take their vows, you become the bride of Christ. Yeah. That came with Lord Chaitanya. He was inviting people to have intimate relationships with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Yeah, the other sampradayas, there's differences, in moods, and that's fine. Prabhupada, what Prabhupada compared the other sampradaya, all the sampradayas to? Different political parties. But, and then there's an election. And then, they all have their campaigns, platform, and their slogans. But then after the election, they all accept, the verdict of the election, and they're all united as, say Americans or Germans. So similarly, even though we have different sampradayas, we're all Vaishnavas. Yeah, Prabhupada compared different. He says different political parties. It's funny. Okay, let's break. Thank you for your kind attention. This all culminates in Srila Prabhupada, our founder Acharya. Tonight at Ganga is 6:30. Be there or at least whatever. Srila Prabhupada.
Just so